Hey there folks, and welcome to this video. This one here is a general notice for those of you unaware of what that content is of this channel, which is where I sit down at the start of every week and talk about my plans for the week ahead, and look a bit back at the past and talk about a topic that's been on my mind. You can find the link to this week's one in the video in the description down below. But let's start off with talking about this past week. And really, I want to talk about Saturday night because at the end of my iRacing stream, I was about to wrap up, and Chibi Broadbent rated me on Twitch, which meant that my Twitch more than doubled in size overnight, and that was awesome. So thanks, Jimmer, for that. I don't know if Jimmer actually watches content where he's featured. He probably doesn't know that he's been recognising this, but last January I was going through a bit of a lull. I made a silly live stream where I was attempting to beat his challenge in Dirt Rally, and he replied to our tweet, and that gave me a massive motivational boost then. I'm pretty sure that was January as well, so second January in a row he's given me a personal boost. Yeah, apart from that, in terms of content, I've been happy with the kind of response. Overwhelmed with some of the positive response that some of my content's gotten, specifically talk about human rights to do with the Dakar Rally, my coverage of the Dakar Rally as well, and talking about the science family. And I'll be looping back around to talk about that video a bit more in a bit, but let's just say that going into my top 5 videos of all time, and it being the first one in 2021 to do anything like that, is awesome. And I'm really happy about that. It's been ratioed like a EA talk about Battlefront 2, but unless it's dunking on Saudi Arabia or Nikita Mazepin, the kind of videos where I'm talking about serious issues do tend to get ratioed a bit like that. But looking forward to this week. I've already done one Dakar review today, and I've done one stream. And over the course of the rest of this week, I plan to do another BUSR stream in the Assetto Corsa Competizione on Friday. I might stream pretty much every night. Don't know what I'm going to be doing yet, and hopefully I'll do it on both YouTube and Twitch, but I'm not so sure about that yet, because if they're going to be more chilled ones, I might just do them over on Twitch. And what else? Finish covering the Dakar Rally, where that wraps up on Friday. Talk about some WRC stuff, because entry list for Monte Carlo should be out now. Talk about the news in F1, for example, the new Alpine boss and Cyril Abiteboul being, well, leaving or quitting or being sacked or whatever. Talk about maybe the F1 calendar a bit. But that will be a lot of fun to do. And let's get into talk about the topic, and I'll talk about it quite quickly. Yeah. Using last week's video as a springboard, where I talked about the science karting track, using an advert, making an advert in which one of the actors used blackface. I saw a lot of people coming in and saying some really strange things. Firstly, a lot of people who didn't watch the video thought that I was talking about Science Junior. They're like, oh, it's his dad. But the thing is, before I was considered an F1 YouTuber by a lot of people, I was considered a rallying YouTuber. I've followed rallying my whole life. I've only followed F1 about half that. And for me, whenever somebody says Carlos Sainz, I think Sainz Senior. So that was a funny little detail. Everyone thought that I was talking about Junior immediately because they're all F1 fans. I was like, you know, this dad's actually got more titles to his name. Of course, he's had a lengthy career. But for me, Carlos Sainz is the one who's more recognisable as, well, Senior is recognisable as the Carlos Sainz, where Junior, unless I talk about him in F1 context, we'll often refer to him as Sainz Junior. But that's largely beside the point. The main kind of thing where people were coming in and criticising me were like, oh, it's a tradition. Saying that, oh, because people using blackface is a tradition, we shouldn't consider it as racist. Ironically, I saw one person saying there was no racism in Spain, and then claiming that I was an American. Which I don't know if they listened to my voice But making those kinds of presumptions, you can argue that's racist. I mean, either way, the zero racism in Spain is a lie. I mean, you can ask Catalans, Basques, you can ask Muslims in Spain, you can ask people who are descended from the old Muslim states in Spain. You can ask people who are in former Spanish colonies. There is racism in Spain, just like there is in, well, every country around the world. And again, it's enshrined in the state. It's how you deal with that it's really the big talking point. But the tradition argument, let's entertain this for a moment. The idea that tradition should exist without criticism, which is what's coming up there. Or there's a second one, which is that the people who are carrying out the act should be the ones who decide whether or not what they're doing is offensive. And look, the second one, that doesn't make any sense. Look, you can't suddenly decide whether or not something you've done is offensive. If, for example, as a queer person, I hear somebody using the F word around me, I very quickly know whether or not that person's being homophobic. I can't quickly double down and go, oh, I'm not being homophobic. Because usually they are. And that's one of the points you've got to get across. I mean, it's not exactly the best equivalency to compare homophobia to racism. But that's the kind of point you need to get across here. I mean, even if it's not your intention, I'm reminded of a kid who wanted to dress up as Mo Salah for Halloween, and I think it was she, used brownface. But this was a kid. Like, there's not necessarily the case that the kid was intending to be racist. The kid was wanting to look like a hero. It's still racist. Whether or not the intention itself is to be racist, it is still racist. And that might disappoint you. That might anger you, but if you want to say that it's not, help work to a point where it won't be. I mean, if that could ever happen. Probably can't, but you do you. And my main thing is talking about the idea of tradition existing without criticism. Let's think about, for example, naming traditions and surnames and marriage. I mean, there are places around the world, there are places in Europe, like Slavic countries, where the surname is different for a man and a woman. Of course, it plays into a gender binary, but the idea is that the woman has the surname of her father, then the surname of her husband. And to be fair, that's something that exists in lots of other European culture, or what people perceive as Western culture. It exists around the world because it's the idea of women being property. That's where it descends from. But it's still linguistic in some of these cultures. I mean, here in the UK, you've still got it with Miss, Mrs, and Ms, with those denotations usually meaning unmarried, married, and divorced, or widowed, or no longer married. I mean, the title system itself is something else as well. That's something that I can rant about at another time, but say those traditions should exist without criticism, that's buying into a cultist mentality. I mean, we've seen in this past week where a cultist mentality can go with those terrorists that stormed the Capitol building. And just on that note for a moment, this is a brief aside, but seriously, how many conservatives are trying to say that it's Antifa, which supposedly is a central organisation, even though the key point of it as an ideology is that it's not, are responsible for it? Because the idea is that so many of the ringleaders from circles like QAnon and other places on the far right and alt-right, should alt-right still really exist, the fact that those leaders were there and that they did that, if you're saying that Antifa are behind that, then you're saying that your side are really dumb. And that's really derogatory to your own side, depriving of the agency to and go out and beat domestic terrorists. But let's get back and wrap this up, because I've gone on for way too long now, and I don't think this video's going to get out in time for midnight. Just because you don't think something's racist doesn't mean it's not racist. Just because if somebody then says it's racist doesn't mean that you have to double down and say all kinds of silly things. And don't ever let traditions just exist because they're traditions. Like, if there's a criticism of it, take it on board and think about what that means to you. Think about what that tradition means to you and all the things like that. Okay? All cool? Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.